They laughed at me under a 20-foot banner that said $500 million, and that was the first time I understood my marriage had not ended in private. It ended in the middle of BIO Boston, beneath blue conference lights, surrounded by thousands of executives, investors, attorneys, scientists, and people who knew how to smile while measuring the value of a human being by the badge hanging around his neck. My wife, Madison Whitaker, had insisted I come with her that evening. She called it the most important night of her career. She said I should be proud to stand beside her. I remember looking at her in the hotel mirror before we left, watching her fasten a pair of pearl earrings I had bought her 3 anniversaries ago, and thinking she looked like someone preparing to be photographed with a future she had already chosen. She barely looked at me when she asked if my suit was the same navy one I wore to charity dinners. There was no warmth in the question, just inventory. At the Boston Convention and Exhibition Center, the reception hall looked less like a business event and more like a cathedral built for money. LED screens rolled through company logos. Men in tailored jackets talked about trial data and market access over sparkling water. Women with polished smiles moved through the room, carrying credentials that opened doors most people never saw. Everywhere I looked, there were quiet conversations worth millions of dollars. Madison walked half a step ahead of me, not beside me, her white dress catching the light as if she wanted the room to know she belonged in it. Then I saw him, Dr. Preston Vale, founder and CEO of Vale Therapeutics, the man whose face had been appearing on Madison's phone at hours no professional message needed to arrive. He was tall, silver at the temples, practiced in that expensive way certain men have when they have been applauded too often. He stood beneath a massive screen reading Vale Nova and Helixer announced strategic merger reception, $500 million. Madison's face changed the second she saw him. It softened, brightened, performed. She touched my arm only long enough to steer me toward him, like a handler bringing an unwanted guest to the sponsor table. Preston looked at me, then at my badge, then at Madison, and smiled as though the punchline had arrived early. "So this is Nathan," he said. "Madison told me you mostly stay out of rooms like this." A few people nearby turned toward us. Madison gave a light laugh, the kind she used when she wanted powerful people to think she was effortless. "Nate prefers quieter things," she said. "He never really cared for the spotlight." Preston lifted his glass. "That is probably for the best. Some men are built for labs, some for boardrooms, and some for waiting at home." The circle around him laughed. Not loudly. That would have been rude. They laughed in the polished way people laugh when they believe the target has no standing to object. I looked at Madison, expecting at least a flicker of shame, one small sign that the woman I had built a life with remembered who I was before this room taught her to be embarrassed by me. Instead, she smiled at Preston and adjusted the edge of his lapel, a touch too intimate to be accidental. That was the moment the noise in the ballroom seemed to fall away. I could still see everything clearly, the champagne bubbles rising in narrow glasses, the blue light reflecting off Madison's wedding ring, the photographer lowering his camera because even he sensed something private had been made public. Preston leaned closer, lowering his voice just enough to pretend he was being discreet. "No offense, Nathan. It takes confidence to attend an event where everyone else is doing something consequential." Madison looked down, but she was still smiling. My chest tightened, not because I was surprised, but because confirmation hurts in a different way than suspicion. Suspicion keeps a door cracked open. Confirmation closes it with your hand still inside. For 6 months, I had watched Madison become a stranger who came home smelling like hotel lobbies and expensive dinners, who guarded her phone, who described Preston as brilliant with the kind of admiration she once reserved for vows. I had seen the upgraded flights, the unexplained overnight stays, the corporate reimbursements that did not match. Her calendar. I had not accused her in the kitchen. I had not raised my voice in the driveway. I had not followed her or begged for scraps of honesty. I had called an attorney, then a forensic accountant, because grown men do not rescue a marriage by losing control of themselves. They gather facts. Madison mistook that silence for weakness. Preston mistook it for irrelevance. Both of them mistook privacy for poverty. I looked past Preston's shoulder at the merger banner glowing above us. $500 million. Vale Nova needed that deal the way a drowning man needs air, and Preston was celebrating before the paperwork could survive daylight. What he did not know was that my firm, Whitaker Recovery Partners, had spent the last 8 weeks reviewing distressed debt connected to Vale Nova's bridge financing. What he did not know was that by noon the next day, his attorneys would learn exactly whose signature sat behind one of the creditor entities with inspection rights. What he did not know was that I had come to Boston as Madison's husband, but I was not going to leave as her fool. Madison finally turned to me, her voice sweet in public and cold underneath. "Nate, please don't make this awkward." I almost laughed then, not because anything was funny, but because she had just let another man humiliate her husband in a room full of strangers and still believed I was the one with the power to embarrass her. I set my untouched glass on a nearby cocktail table. Slowly, carefully. No drama. No scene. "I wouldn't dream of it," I said. Preston smirked. "Good man." Madison exhaled like she had managed me, like I was a temper she had trained, like the evening still belonged to them. I looked at the two of them standing beneath that glowing $500 million promise, her hand near his cuff, his confidence wrapped around her like borrowed jewelry, and I felt the last living thread of my marriage go quiet inside me. I did not threaten him. I did not warn her. I did not give either of them the satisfaction of seeing pain turn into noise. I only stepped away from the circle, took out my phone, and sent one message to my attorney, Eleanor Brooks. "Preserve everything. Corporate lane only." Then I walked toward the glass wall overlooking the Boston harbor, while behind me Madison and Preston kept laughing, completely unaware that the joke had just changed owners. By the time I reached the glass wall overlooking the harbor, the reflection in front of me looked like a man who had every reason to break and no permission to do it. Behind me, Madison's laughter rose and disappeared into the noise of the reception, polished and easy, as if 15 years of marriage could be folded into a cocktail napkin and left on a sponsor table. I watched the dark water beyond the convention center and let my breathing settle. There was a time when I would have turned around, walked back to her, and asked what had happened to us. There was a time when I believed a marriage deserved one more conversation simply because it had survived so many hard years. But that version of me had been educated by receipts, late-night messages, hotel charges, and the slow death of being treated like an inconvenience in my own home. My phone vibrated less than a minute after I sent the message. Eleanor Brooks never wasted words. She was a corporate attorney with a divorce practice sharp enough to make wealthy men stop improvising. Her reply said, "Received. Do not engage personally. Confirm if she is present with Preston Vale." I typed back, "Yes." Publicly. His hand was on her lower back earlier. She laughed when he insulted me. Eleanor answered, "Then say nothing else tonight. Save badge scans, photographs, receipts, travel records. We separate marital issues from corporate rights. Clean lanes." That was Eleanor's phrase for everything. Clean lanes. Do not mix the marriage with the money. Do not let humiliation become leverage unless the law already recognizes it. Do not write angry messages that opposing counsel can frame as revenge. I had learned to respect that discipline because discipline was the only thing Madison had not been able to take from me. A waiter passed with small plates of lobster salad, and I realized I had not eaten since morning. My hands were steady. That mattered. I opened the secure folder Samuel Reeves had sent me 2 days before I left for Boston. Samuel was my senior analyst at Whitaker Recovery Partners, a firm so intentionally boring on the outside that Madison had once described it to her friends as some finance cleanup thing. She never asked what that meant. She only knew I did not appear on panels, did not buy tables at gala dinners, did not treat my net worth like a personality. In her new world, that made me unimpressive. In mine, it made me useful. Whitaker Recovery Partners specialized in complicated debt, distressed positions, and quiet rights hidden in documents that louder men forgot to read. We did not chase headlines. We bought paper. We reviewed covenants. We found the sentence on page 147 that turned arrogance into liability. Vale Nova had come across Samuel's desk because its bridge financing had been trading strangely for weeks. The company looked glamorous from the stage, but the numbers underneath were thin. Cash runway shorter than projected. Milestone payments tied to clinical data that looked less certain than Preston's public confidence suggested. Debt covenants written tightly enough that a material disclosure issue could give the creditor side real power. None of that had anything to do with Madison when I first saw it. That was why I had not acted. I would not weaponize my business because my wife had forgotten her vows. But Preston Vale had made his company's credibility part of a public performance, and Madison had chosen to stand inside that performance while pretending I was too small to understand the room. That changed the timeline, not the law. I scrolled through Samuel's summary again. Vale Nova Bridge Facility. Inspection rights triggered by adverse information. Mandatory preservation obligations if business claims tied to the merger are challenged. Related party and executive expense exposure requiring review before close. The words were dry, almost dull, which made them more dangerous. Real power rarely arrives with music. It arrives as a notice on letterhead. Across the room, Preston had moved Madison closer to a cluster of bankers. He placed her in the conversation like proof that his life was as controlled as his company. Madison laughed at something one of them said, then glanced toward the harbor and saw me watching. For 1 second, her smile faltered. Not with guilt, with irritation. She excused herself and crossed the room, her heels clicking against the polished floor, her conference badge swinging against her dress. "Nathan," she said quietly, stopping just close enough to keep anyone from hearing. "Please do not stand over here like a wounded statue. People notice things." I turned from the window. They noticed enough already. Her eyes hardened. "Do not do this tonight." "Do what?" "Make me manage your feelings in the middle of my career." That sentence told me more than any confession could have. My pain was not real to her. It was a scheduling problem. "You invited me," I said. "I thought you could behave like an adult." I looked past her toward Preston. He was smiling at us now, entertained. "Is that what you call what happened over there?" Madison folded her arms, careful not to wrinkle the fabric. Preston was joking. "You are too sensitive because you never wanted this life for me." "This life?" I asked. "The one where your boss touches you in public and insults your husband in front of investors." A flicker crossed her face, but she buried it quickly. "Do not embarrass me." There it was again. Not "do not misunderstand me." Not "I am sorry." Now we need to talk. Only "do not embarrass me." I nodded once, because the answer I wanted to give belonged to a weaker man and I refused to become him for her convenience. "Enjoy your evening, Madison." She stepped closer, lowering her voice. "You have no idea how important this merger is." I looked at the glowing banner behind her. "I have some idea." She gave a short laugh. "No, Nathan, you really do not. This is not one of your little private spreadsheets." I almost told her then. I almost told her that the man she had just mocked in front of Preston had already read more of Vale Nova's risk profile than she had. I almost told her that her brilliant chief executive had built his celebration on documents my lawyers could request before breakfast. But information is only power when you do not spend it emotionally. So I said nothing. Madison shook her head, mistaking restraint for defeat, and walked back to Preston. He leaned down as she approached, and she whispered something that made him look at me again with a grin. My phone vibrated a second time. This message was from Samuel. "Confirmed. Our entity holds sufficient position to demand review if counsel approves. Also, there are unusual conference expenses tied to executive office and strategic partnerships, Boston included." I read the message twice. Not because I was surprised, but because the shape of the night had become clear. Madison had not merely betrayed me. Preston had not merely disrespected me. They had grown careless enough to bring their private arrogance into corporate records. I put the phone away and looked back at the ballroom. Madison thought she had traded a quiet husband for a powerful man. Preston thought he was standing at the edge of a $500 million victory lap. Neither of them understood that the paper behind his empire had already started to move. The reception did not end so much as dissolve into smaller performances. The important people drifted toward private dinners, closed-door suites, and invitation-only meetings where tomorrow's announcements would be shaped before the public ever heard them. Madison did not come looking for me again until Preston had finished collecting compliments from men who wanted access to his company and women who wanted being close to his rise. I had taken a seat near the west corridor, far enough from the music to think, close enough to see who left with whom. Not because I needed proof of what my eyes already knew, but because timing matters. In business, the minute something happens can matter as much as the thing itself. At 9:46 that evening, Madison walked out of the ballroom with Preston's hand resting briefly at the center of her back. At 9:49, she returned alone, saw me seated by the corridor windows, and approached with the expression she used when she had decided I was the problem. "We need to talk," she said. I looked up from my phone. That would be a first tonight. Her mouth tightened. Not here. She turned toward a quieter hallway, lined with sponsor displays and framed photographs of Boston's skyline. I followed, not because she had earned obedience, but because Eleanor had told me not to engage unless necessary. And sometimes the cleanest record is made by letting someone else keep talking. Madison stopped near a display for a gene therapy company and folded her arms. You embarrassed me. The sentence came out so quickly I wondered how long she had been rehearsing it. Preston insulted me in front of your colleagues, I said. You laughed. He was trying to lighten the mood. No, I said. He was testing whether you would defend your husband. She looked away first. That mattered too. Nathan, you do not understand what I am building here. With him. With my career, she said, but the correction came half a second late. I have worked too hard to get into rooms like this just so you can stand in the corner judging everyone. I studied her under the hallway lights. She looked expensive, composed, and strangely hollow. The pearls at her ears caught the light every time she moved her head. Small reminders from a marriage she was pretending had never paid for anything beautiful. I was not judging everyone, I said. Only the man holding my wife like a closing trophy. Her eyes flashed. Do not make this vulgar. Then stop making it obvious. For the first time that night, Madison had no polished answer. She looked back toward the ballroom, as if Preston might appear and rescue the conversation with a joke. He did appear, but not to rescue her. He came around the corner with 2 hotel key envelopes in one hand and his phone in the other, smiling like he had walked onto a stage he owned. Everything all right? He asked. Madison straightened immediately. It was subtle, but I saw it. She performed for him even in conflict. Nathan is upset, she said. Preston looked at me with theatrical sympathy. I can imagine this is a lot for you. These conferences can be overwhelming when you are not used to this level of activity. I stood slowly, not to intimidate him. To make sure he understood, I was choosing calm at eye level. I am used to activity, Dr. Vale. I am less used to executives. Behaving like first-year associates after 2 drinks. His smile thinned. Madison whispered, Nathan. Preston gave a soft chuckle, but his eyes had changed. Men like Preston do not mind being cruel. They mind being answered without fear. You have a sharper tongue than I expected, he said. Madison made you sound so passive. Madison has been wrong before. She inhaled sharply. Preston looked amused again. Well, since we are being honest, your wife is not happy. She wants a life that moves forward. Some men cannot accept when the woman beside them outgrows the size of the room they can provide. He said it carefully, softly, with just enough volume for 2 passing attendees to slow down and listen. That was his real talent. He could turn humiliation into a networking exercise. Madison did not stop him. She looked at me as if waiting for me to finally break, to raise my voice, to become the jealous husband Preston could dismiss. Instead, I put my phone in my jacket pocket and asked, Is that what you told her? That I could not provide the room? Preston's smile came back. I told her she deserved to be seen. Madison's face softened at that, and in that tiny movement, I saw exactly how he had sold her the affair. Not with passion, with status, with badges, dinners, introductions, sweets, and the lie that being admired by powerful strangers was the same thing as being loved. And what does she deserve after the merger closes? I asked. Madison looked confused, but Preston understood enough to pause. Excuse me, a title? A promotion? Equity? Or just better seating at the next reception? Madison snapped. That is cruel. I looked at her. No, Cruel was laughing. Preston stepped closer, still wearing the CEO's smile. But the charm had begun to harden around the edges. You should be careful, Nathan. Bitterness can make a man sound small. Careful is exactly what I am being. My voice stayed even. That is the part neither of you seems to recognize. A housekeeping employee pushed a cart at the far end of the hallway. Somewhere behind us, applause rose from the ballroom and faded. Preston glanced down at his phone, then back at Madison. We have a private dinner with Helixer's people in 15 minutes. He said we, and Madison heard a promise in it. I heard exposure. Madison turned to me with a colder kind of confidence, one borrowed from the man beside her. Go back to the hotel, Nathan. We can talk after the conference. No, I said. We cannot. She blinked. What is that supposed to mean? I took off my wedding ring, not dramatically, not in anger, just as a fact whose time had arrived. I held it for a second, feeling the small weight of years reduced to metal, then slipped it into my pocket. Madison's face changed. Not grief. Alarm. She had expected pain she could manage, not a boundary she could not negotiate. Preston laughed under his breath. That is a little theatrical, do you not think? I looked at him. Theater is announcing a $500 million transaction in a ballroom before your records are ready for daylight. The silence after that was the first honest thing Preston had given me all night. His eyes narrowed, measuring whether I was guessing. Madison looked between us. What are you talking about? I did not answer her. I had already said more than Eleanor would like, and even that sentence had been a warning to myself more than to them. Preston recovered with a smile that did not reach his eyes. Come on, Madison. We are late. She hesitated, and for one thin second, I saw fear cut through the glamour. Then Preston touched her elbow, and she chose him again. They walked away together, their reflections stretching along the polished corridor floor. Before they disappeared around the corner, Madison looked back at me, angry that I was not following, angry that I was not pleading, angry that the old version of me had not shown up to make her feel powerful. My phone vibrated as they vanished. Eleanor had sent one line. If Vale proceeds with investor statements tomorrow, we move before breakfast. I looked down the empty corridor, then at the ring in my palm. Madison thought she had handed me humiliation. Without knowing it, she had handed me the timeline. At 6:15 the next morning, Boston looked clean in the way cities look before people start lying in conference rooms. The harbor was pale, gray, the streets around the hotel still damp from overnight mist, and the lobby downstairs was already filling with executives carrying coffee, garment bags, and the kind of confidence that comes from believing the day has been arranged in their favor. I had slept for less than 3 hours, but I did not feel tired. Fatigue belongs to confusion. I was no longer confused. Madison did not come back to our room until after 1 in the morning. I knew because the door opened quietly, then paused, as if she expected me to be sitting in the dark waiting to interrogate her. I was not. I was at the desk with my laptop open, reviewing documents with Eleanor and Samuel on a secure call. Madison saw the screen, saw the neat columns of numbers, and gave a small sigh of disgust. You are still working? She asked, like work was the betrayal. Yes, I said. She kicked off her heels near the closet and stood there in the soft hotel light, looking irritated rather than ashamed. I do not have the energy for a fight tonight. Then do not start one. She turned toward me. That is exactly what I mean. This tone, this quiet punishment. You have been doing it for months. I looked at the time in the corner of my laptop. 1:12 in the morning. Eleanor was still on the call, muted. Samuel was still in the shared review room, waiting for me to say nothing reckless. Madison, I said, we will speak through counsel from this point forward. Her face changed in an instant. Counsel? Yes. You cannot be serious. I closed the laptop halfway, not because I was hiding anything, but because I wanted her to see my face when I answered. I am completely serious. She laughed once, sharp and frightened underneath. Because of tonight? Because Preston made a joke? Because of choices. Tonight only made them public. She stared at me as if I had switched languages. In a way, I had. For years, our arguments had been written in the grammar of marriage. Disappointment, promises, explanations, late apologies. That night, I had moved us into the grammar of consequences. It sounded colder because it was more honest. You are overreacting, she said. You took off your ring in a hallway like. You were trying to humiliate me. No, I said. I took it off because I finally believed you. Madison opened her mouth, then closed it again. The room went quiet except for the hotel air conditioner humming under the window. Believe what? She asked. That you want a life where I am useful only if I stay invisible. She looked away first, and I knew the sentence had landed exactly where it belonged. Preston values me, she said, softer now. He sees what I can become. Preston sees what you can do for his image until the merger closes. Her eyes hardened again because truth feels insulting when someone has been dressing it as destiny. You do not know him. I know his balance sheet. That was the wrong thing to say, or maybe the right thing too early. Madison turned back slowly. What does that mean? I stood, took my phone, and walked toward the window. It means this conversation is over. She followed me with her eyes, trying to decide whether I was bluffing. Madison had known me long enough to understand I did not bluff often, but she had spent enough time with Preston to believe every man eventually performed. Nathan, if you try to drag my name through some ugly divorce because your ego got bruised, I will not forgive you. I almost smiled. Not from amusement. From the exhaustion of hearing a person confuse accountability with cruelty. I am not dragging your name anywhere. I am preserving records. Records, travel, expenses, joint accounts, communications that touch marital assets, and anything corporate counsel determines is relevant on their side. Her face lost color at the word expenses. It was brief, but visible. You have no right to my work accounts. I did not say I did. I let the silence sit between us. That is why attorneys exist. Madison looked toward my laptop, then toward my suitcase near the door. Who have you been talking to? My lawyer. Since when? Long enough to avoid making emotional mistakes. That answer hurt her pride more than any accusation would have. She had imagined me ignorant, perhaps sad, perhaps suspicious in a helpless way. She had not imagined method. At 6:15, while Madison slept on the far side of the bed with her back to me, I was already dressed. I left the room without waking her and met Eleanor Brooks in a conference suite 2 floors below. She had flown in from New York on the first shuttle, wearing a dark suit and carrying a leather folder thick enough to end several conversations before they began. Samuel joined through video from our Manhattan office. His screen showed 3 monitors behind him, each filled with document indexes, financing schedules, and email metadata. Eleanor did not ask how I felt. Good lawyers know feelings are real, but they are not instructions. She placed 2 folders in front of me. Marriage lane, she said, tapping the first. Corporate lane, she said, tapping the second. They do not cross unless a court or a lawful request makes them cross. Understood. Understood. On the marriage side, we prepare a divorce filing and request preservation of financial records. No public allegations. No personal messages. No threats. If she used marital funds for travel, gifts, or anything connected to the relationship, we address it through the proper process. I nodded. On the corporate side, she continued, Whitaker Recovery Partners does not act because your wife embarrassed you. It acts because the entity holds a position with rights under the bridge documents, and because Samuel's review identifies potential disclosure and covenant issues that may affect creditors and the pending transaction. We document that cleanly. Samuel leaned toward his camera. The issue is not just cash runway anymore. The conference expense trail ties executive office approvals to strategic partnership spending. Madison's department appears in the routing. Some of it may be innocent. Some of it may not be. Either way, Helixer's counsel will have to care if Vale Nova's certified clean representations. Eleanor slid a draft notice across the table. The language was dry enough to put a careless person to sleep and precise enough to wake a careful one. Preservation of documents. Inspection rights. Potential breach review. Merger-related disclosure concerns. Related expense classifications. No drama. No accusations beyond what the documents supported. Once this goes out, Eleanor said, Preston will know someone serious is looking under the floorboards. Good, I said. She studied me for a moment. Not good because it hurts him. Good because the records require it. I held her gaze. That is what I meant. She nodded once and handed me a pen. Outside the suite, the conference day was beginning. I could hear voices in the hallway, badges tapping against lanyards, coffee cups being lifted from service trays, people rehearsing optimism before their panels. Somewhere upstairs, Madison would wake up believing the worst consequence of last night was an uncomfortable conversation with her husband. Somewhere across the hotel, Preston Vale would be adjusting his tie, preparing to smile for Helixer's team as if his company's future had already cleared every checkpoint. I signed the authorization at 6:38 in the morning. Eleanor gathered the pages, placed them back into the corporate folder, and said, Then we proceed. I looked through the glass wall at Boston brightening under the morning sun. I did not feel victorious. Victory was too loud a word for the end of a marriage. What I felt was steadier than that. For the first time in months, my life had moved out of Madison's hands and back into mine. By 7:20 that morning, the notice had left Eleanor's office and entered a world where charm did not matter. It went first to Vale Nova's general counsel, then to the outside firm handling the merger, then to the attention of Helixer's deal team, because their own representations depended on what Vale Nova had promised them. No one used the word scandal. No one mentioned Madison's laughter. No one described Preston's hand on her back or the way he had smiled when he called me small without using the word. The document did not need any of that. It had dates, rights, clauses, and requests. That was the beauty of clean pressure. It did not sound emotional, so serious people had to take it seriously. I was in a quiet corner of the hotel restaurant when Samuel called. Around me, conference attendees were eating egg white omelets and checking their schedules on phones, their badges already clipped on, their conversations bright with rehearsed confidence. Samuel's voice came through calm but fast. Helixer acknowledged receipt. Their counsel asked whether we have supporting basis for the expense classification issue and the clinical disclosure concern. What did Eleanor say? I asked. She said we have enough to request preservation and review, not enough to accuse. Which is exactly why they are worried. I looked through the restaurant window toward the convention center. Buses were pulling up along the curb, unloading another wave of people chasing partnerships and headlines. Walk me through it again, I said. Samuel did not sigh. Good analysts understand repetition is not doubt. It is discipline. Vale Nova's last investor materials described the Phase 2 data package as cleanly aligned with the regulatory path they presented to Helixer. But the internal schedule we reviewed suggests at least 2 data readout dependencies were delayed, then repackaged in the timeline as non-critical. That might be acceptable. It might be explainable. But if they certified no material issues while knowing Helixer was relying on that timeline, counsel has to examine it. And the expenses? Worse for optics. Maybe worse legally if approvals were improper. There are conference travel costs, upgraded hotel charges, private dinners, and consulting-related allocations moving through strategic partnerships. Madison's unit appears in the routing. Preston's office appears in approvals. Some charges line up with dates when there were no scheduled investor meetings listed. I closed my eyes for 1 second. Not because I was shocked by the affair. That truth had already finished its work. But because Madison had always been careful about appearances, and now I could see how appearances had made her careless with substance. Do not overstate it, I said. We are not alleging fraud unless counsel says fraud. Understood, Samuel said. Right now it is enough to make Helixer pause. Pause. In mergers, that word can sound gentle to outsiders. It is not gentle. Pause means bankers stop celebrating and start preserving messages. Pause means the buyer's counsel widens the diligence request. Pause means board members ask what they were not told. Pause means a chief executive who expected applause suddenly has to answer questions in rooms without cameras. At 7:43, Madison called me. I let it ring once, twice, 3 times, then declined and sent one message. Please direct legal and financial matters through counsel. She called again immediately. I declined again. Then a text appeared. Nathan, what did you do? Not a question mark. An accusation wearing grammar. I did not answer. A second text came. Preston is furious. You need to stop whatever this is before you hurt my career. There it was. Not our marriage. Not the truth. Her career. I placed the phone face down on the table and paid for coffee I had barely touched. By 8:15, the convention center had changed texture. Most people would not have noticed. The banners were still bright. The registration desks were still busy. The branded booths still handed out tote bags and glossy brochures. But in the pockets where real decisions happened, the air had gone thin. A Helixer attorney I recognized from diligence calls crossed the atrium with 2 associates and did not stop for anyone. One of Vale Nova's bankers stood near a pillar, speaking into his phone with his back turned and one hand pressed against his forehead. Preston's chief financial officer passed me without seeing me, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. Documents had a way of moving faster than gossip among people paid to fear signatures. I was near the second floor overlook when Madison found me. She was not in the white dress anymore. She had changed into a cream suit, expensive and precise, but the confidence from the night before had cracks in it. You decline my calls, she said. Yes. Do you have any idea what is happening right now? Some. She stepped closer, lowering her voice. Helixer is asking questions. Preston had to leave the breakfast. Legal is in a closed room. People are looking at me like I did something. I let that sentence sit between us. She heard it too late. Did you? I asked. Her eyes flashed. How dare you? That is not an answer. I did not do anything that concerns you. If marital funds were used, It concerns me. If your department routed expenses tied to a relationship with your chief executive, it concerns your employer. If those expenses touch business claims tied to the merger, it concerns Helixer. I am not the center of every consequence, Madison. She looked around to make sure no one was listening. This is revenge. No, I said. Revenge wants noise. This is review. Because your feelings got hurt. Because documents exist. Her mouth trembled, but she forced it steady. You are trying to ruin him because you are jealous. I almost felt sorry for how badly she needed that to be true. If I was jealous, then Preston was still powerful. If I was jealous, then Madison was still desirable enough to cause chaos. If I was jealous, then this was a love triangle instead of a compliance problem. Madison, I said, a $500 million transaction does not pause because a husband is jealous. It pauses because lawyers see risk. For the first time, she had no immediate reply. Her eyes moved over my face as if searching for the man who would soften to protect her from the world she had chosen. He was gone. Not dead. Just unavailable. Preston said you must have planned this, she whispered. Preston should worry less about my planning and more about his records. She swallowed. What records? Before I could answer, Preston came through the glass doors near the conference rooms with two attorneys beside him. He saw Madison first, then followed her stare to me. The performance dropped from his face so completely that I almost admired the honesty of it. No smirk. No charm. No joke about rooms I did not belong in. Just a man realizing that the quiet husband from last night was attached to the paper now sitting on every lawyer's table. He walked toward us, but one of his attorneys touched his arm and said something low. Preston stopped. That small restraint told me everything. Counsel had warned him not to speak to me. Madison noticed too. The man she had believed could command any room had just been managed by his own lawyer in a public hallway. Her face changed in a way I had never seen before. Not regret. Not yet. Recognition. Preston looked at me across the atrium, and I held his gaze without moving. Around us, the conference continued pretending to be normal. Coffee poured. Badges swung. Screens glowed. But inside the merger room, the floor had started to crack. By 10:30 that morning, Preston Vale was still scheduled to appear on the main stage. That was the strange thing about public failure in professional America. It does not always arrive with sirens or shouting. Sometimes it arrives while your name is still printed in the program, while your headshot is still smiling from the event app, while 2,000 people are still planning to sit down and hear you explain the future. The panel was called Financing the Next Generation of Therapeutics, and Preston had been given the center seat, the one reserved for the man everyone expected to celebrate. Madison had helped arrange parts of it. She had told me weeks earlier that this panel would be his victory lap, though she did not use those words. She called it visibility. She called it influence. She called it being close to the people who mattered. Now, standing near the entrance to the auditorium, I watched her try to keep that old belief alive. She was near the first row, speaking to a woman from Vale Nova's communications team, nodding too quickly, checking her phone every few seconds. Her cream suit still looked immaculate, but she did not. Fear had a way of disturbing a person from the inside before it touched the fabric. Preston entered from the side corridor with two attorneys, his chief financial officer, and a public relations director who looked like she had aged 5 years since breakfast. He had changed ties. I noticed that absurd detail because men like Preston believe in costume repair. If the room is slipping, fix the knot. If the documents are bleeding, shine the shoes. He saw me near the back wall and stopped for half a second. His attorney leaned in and said something, probably the same instruction Eleanor had given me. Do not engage. Preston turned away, but the clean line of his posture had broken. He walked like a man carrying invisible weight. Eleanor stood beside me with her tablet under one arm. Helixer has not signed, she said. Their counsel requested expanded diligence, board-level confirmation, and a hold on public transaction language until the disclosure issues are reviewed. Does Vale Nova know? I asked. They know enough. Across the auditorium, the large screen rotated through sponsor graphics and then landed on Vale Nova's logo beside Helixer's. A few people clapped when they saw it. They did not know the logo had become evidence of confidence that counsel was now trying to walk back. Samuel texted me from New York. Press row is hearing there is a delay. Not official. Be careful if approached. I placed the phone in my pocket. I did not want the press. I did not want applause. I wanted the record to move in the right order, because the right order was what separated consequence from revenge. Madison looked toward the back and found me. For a moment, her expression seemed to ask whether I would stop. That was another misunderstanding. I was not driving the transaction anymore. The notice had opened a door, but the documents were walking through it on their own. The moderator stepped onto the stage, smiling brightly, and introduced the panelists. People settled into their seats. Laptops opened. Cameras lifted. Preston stood behind the curtain line, waiting for his name. His chief financial officer kept glancing at his phone. The public relations director whispered to an event coordinator. Then one of Helixer's senior attorneys entered the auditorium through the side aisle and moved directly toward Vale Nova's outside counsel. She did not hurry. She did not need to. Serious disruption moves at walking speed. I saw the paper in her hand. I saw Vale Nova's counsel read the first page. I saw his face empty itself of expression. The moderator said Preston's name, and applause began. Preston took one step toward the stage, then stopped when his counsel touched his sleeve. It was a small gesture, almost invisible from the front rows, but the people who mattered saw it. Bankers saw it. Lawyers saw it. Board observers saw it. Madison saw it. The applause thinned awkwardly because Preston did not appear when expected. The moderator covered with a joke about conference timing, but his eyes moved toward the side of the stage. A text flashed across my phone from Eleanor, though she stood beside me. Helixer has formally delayed signing pending internal review. Do not speak. I did not. On stage, another panelist was introduced out of order. The moderator kept smiling. The screen behind the chairs still displayed Vale Nova's logo, bright and enormous, but now it looked less like a promise and more like a question no one wanted to answer in public. Preston was pulled behind a partition with his attorneys. Through the gap, I could see his hand moving sharply as he spoke, then stopping when counsel said something. He had spent the night treating humiliation like a sport. Now he was learning that legal exposure had no appetite for performance. Madison hurried toward the side corridor, but a communications staffer stopped her. I could not hear their words, but I saw Madison's face tighten. She was being kept outside the room where Preston's future was being discussed. That must have hurt more than any insult I could have delivered. She had believed proximity was power. Now proximity had become contamination. A reporter from a trade publication stood near the aisle, whispering into his phone. Two bankers stepped out of the auditorium together. One said, "Material review," just loud enough for the phrase to travel. That was all it took. The room did not explode. It cooled. Conversations lowered. People checked messages. Heads turned toward exits. In the first row, Madison sat down slowly, as if her knees had remembered something her pride had not. The panel continued without Preston, which was worse than cancellation. His empty chair remained on stage, centered under the lights. No one mentioned why he was missing. No one had to. In rooms like that, silence is not absence. Silence is information. Eleanor's phone buzzed. She read, then said quietly, "Vale Nova's board is convening an emergency call. Helixer wants written answers before they proceed. The expense review is now part of diligence." I watched Madison stare at the empty chair. Her fingers moved to her wedding ring, then stopped when she remembered mine was no longer on my hand. She turned and looked back at me. The anger was still there, but it had been joined by something colder. Understanding. She had laughed because she thought I had no room to stand in. Preston had laughed because he thought the merger room belonged to him. Now his chair was empty. His lawyers were speaking for him, and every important person in the auditorium understood that something inside his perfect story had failed a basic inspection. I did not smile. I did not nod. I did not let Madison see triumph because triumph would have made the morning smaller than it was. This was not a jealous husband ruining a conference. This was a chief executive discovering that documents outlive charm. A few minutes later, Preston came out of the side corridor. The color had drained from his face, but he still tried to arrange it into authority. Madison stood quickly and reached for his arm. He moved past her without stopping. The gesture was small, but the damage it did to her was visible. Last night he had touched her in public to claim her. This morning he avoided touching her in public to protect himself. She stood frozen in the aisle as he disappeared with counsel. I turned to leave before she could come after me. Eleanor walked beside me through the rear doors into the bright convention hallway, where attendees were still moving between sessions with tote bags and coffee. unaware that a $500 million celebration had just become a legal problem. You understand what happens next, Eleanor said. Yes, I answered. They blame each other. She glanced at me. They usually do. Behind us, the auditorium doors closed softly. No shouting followed. No dramatic scene. Just the muted sound of a room adjusting to a new truth. The joke had changed owners, and now the bill was coming due. Madison caught up to Preston outside the auditorium, but he did not slow down for her until they reached the service corridor behind the speaker lounges. I would not have followed them if Eleanor had not received a message from Vale Nova's outside counsel requesting a location for formal acknowledgement of our notice. Clean lanes meant being where the lawyers expected me to be, not where. My pride wanted to wander. The corridor was quieter than the public hallway, lined with gray doors, folding tables, spare signage, and crates of bottled water. It had none of the glamour Madison had been chasing all year. No blue lights. No branded cocktails. No photographers. Just the backside of a conference where expensive people came to fall apart without an audience. Eleanor stepped into a small meeting room with 2 attorneys, and I remained outside near a stack of unused sponsor banners. That was when I heard Madison's voice. Preston, stop walking away from me. He answered without turning around. Not here. You ignored me in front of everyone. Because my lawyers told me not to create another problem. Another problem? Her laugh was thin and shocked. Is that what I am now? There was a pause. Then Preston said, right now, yes. I looked toward the meeting room door. Eleanor was inside, and I had no reason to interrupt. I also had no reason to protect Madison from a conversation she had chosen to earn. Preston lowered his voice, but the corridor carried sound too well. You told me he was harmless. Madison snapped back. He was harmless to us because you told me everything was clean. Do not put this on me. You stood there last night and mocked him. Because you said he was nobody in our world. The words landed with a dull force. Our world. That was the phrase she had probably repeated to herself for months. Our world had dinners on seaport rooftops, private introductions, industry whispers, and hotel elevators that opened onto floors ordinary attendees never saw. Our world had made her feel selected. Now the man who invited her into it was trying to push her back across the line. I never said he was nobody, Madison said, but the weakness in her voice betrayed her. Preston gave a short, bitter laugh. Madison, you said he did not even understand what you did. You said he had money tied up in boring recovery investments. You said he hated attention. You did not mention he had a creditor position that could put my merger under a microscope. I did not know, she whispered. Exactly. How was I supposed to know? You were married to him. The cruelty in that answer was elegant because it sounded like logic. Madison had spent months telling herself I was too small to matter, and now Preston was blaming her for believing it. I could picture her face without seeing it, the confusion of a woman watching her fantasy turn its teeth on her. You told me I deserved better, she said. I told you what you wanted to hear because you were useful. The corridor went silent. Even from where I stood, that sentence felt like a door closing. Madison did not speak for several seconds. When she did, her voice had changed. Useful. Preston exhaled hard. Do not act naive. You opened doors in strategic partnerships. You managed relationships. You made certain people comfortable. You were good at that. You said after the merger closed, things would be different. Everything is different now. Because Nathan found your weak spot. Because your husband turned a domestic embarrassment into a diligence event. I stepped away from the wall then, not toward them, just enough that I could see the reflection in a glass panel at the end of the corridor. Preston was standing with one hand on his phone, the other at his hip, no longer the polished visionary from the stage. Madison stood a few feet from him, arms wrapped around herself, her cream suit suddenly looking like armor made for a battle she did not understand. Do not call my marriage a domestic embarrassment, she said. The old Madison might have meant that. This Madison said it because the words made her sound less abandoned. Preston looked down at his phone. The board wants me on an emergency call. Helixer is asking for expanded expense schedules. Do you understand what that means? It means you lied to me. It means you need to stop contacting me directly until counsel sorts this out. She stared at him. You cannot be serious. I am protecting the company. You mean yourself. Those are aligned at the moment. That was Preston Vale stripped to the foundation. Not passion, not vision. Alignment. Madison had mistaken a corporate man's attention for devotion, and now she was learning that she had been a line item in his risk calculation. She stepped closer. I left my husband standing in that ballroom for you. Preston's reply came fast. No, Madison. You humiliated your husband because you wanted to feel above him. That is not the same as doing something for me. I looked down at my hands. They were still steady, but there was an ache under my ribs that no legal victory could reach. Hearing him say it did not make Madison innocent. It made the whole thing uglier. She had not been seduced by love. She had been flattered into cruelty, then discarded when cruelty became inconvenient. You promised me a future, she said. Preston's voice dropped. I promised you access. The meeting room door opened behind me, and Eleanor stepped out with a document in her hand. She saw my face, then glanced toward the corridor. She did not ask what I had heard. They acknowledged preservation obligations, she said quietly. Vale Nova's board call starts in 10 minutes. Helixer is holding all transaction language. Understood. Madison appeared around the corner a moment later. Her eyes were bright, but dry. She stopped when she saw me, and for the first time since we arrived in Boston, she did not look irritated that I existed. She looked afraid that I had seen the price tag on the life she chose. Nathan, she said. I waited. Preston came out behind her, saw me, and immediately looked toward Eleanor instead, because now he understood which conversations mattered. This is between counsel, he said stiffly. Eleanor answered before I could. Then I recommend you return to counsel. Preston's jaw tightened, but he did not argue. Without Madison, without a hand on her back, without even a glance that could be mistaken for loyalty, he walked toward the boardroom. Madison watched him go. Last night, she had stood beside him like a woman being introduced to power. This morning, she stood behind him like a liability he had decided not to carry. She turned back to me. I did not know he would do this. I looked at her for a long moment. You knew what you were doing when you laughed. Her mouth trembled. Nathan, please. No. The word was quiet, but it ended something. Talk to your attorney. I walked past her with Eleanor beside me, leaving Madison in the service corridor among empty crates, folded signs, and the wreckage of a promise that had never been as real as my silence. Behind us, she called my name once, but I did not stop. Not because I felt nothing, because feeling something was no longer a reason to turn around. By early afternoon, the conference had returned to its public rhythm, but the private damage was spreading faster than any announcement could contain. People still walked past the booths collecting brochures, still smiled for photographs, still talked about innovation, partnerships, and patient impact, but underneath the polished language, the deal had gone cold. Helixer's team stopped using the word close. Vale Nova's bankers stopped using the word timing. The public relations staff stopped correcting rumors because correcting them would have required knowing which version of the truth would survive the next hour. I sat with Eleanor in a temporary legal suite on the third floor of the convention center, while Samuel joined by video with a document tracker open behind him. Every row on his screen represented something Vale Nova now had to preserve: board minutes, executive emails, expense approvals, clinical milestone summaries, investor presentation drafts, and communication with Helixer about the merger. None of it looked dramatic. That was the point. A company can survive anger. It struggles to survive records that contradict confidence. Eleanor read from a message she had just received. Helixer has suspended transaction signing pending expanded diligence. They want full backup on the clinical timeline, expense classification, and executive sign-off process. Samuel said, Vale Nova's cash position makes a delay expensive. If this slips even 30 days, they need new financing or concessions. I looked at the table. And Preston. Eleanor did not soften her answer. The board has placed him under internal review. Not removed yet. Restricted. Counsel will speak for him on merger issues. Restricted. The word was almost delicate. In reality, it meant Preston Vale could no longer walk into every room as the man in control. His lawyers were reviewing his communications. His board was reviewing his judgment. His buyer was reviewing whether his company had sold them a cleaner story than the documents could support. I felt no rush of joy. The first thing people misunderstand about consequences is that they are not always satisfying when they arrive. Sometimes they are simply quiet and heavy. My phone lit up with Madison's name again. She had called 8 times since the service corridor. I had answered none of them. Her texts had changed tone throughout the day. At first, they accused. Then they demanded. Then they softened. Nathan, please, this is getting out of control. Nathan, I need to explain. Nathan, Preston is not taking my calls now. That last one stayed on the screen longer than the others. Preston is not taking my calls now. Last night, she had stood beside him under a glowing merger banner, laughing as if I were a man she had outgrown. By lunch, she had become a phone call he could not afford to answer. Eleanor glanced at the screen. Do not respond. I will not. Good. Her attorney can contact me. Samuel cleared his throat on the video. There is more. Vale Nova's internal reimbursement data shows several entries routed through strategic partnerships for private dinners and travel that do not match the official conference schedule. Some were approved from Preston's office. Madison appears on at least 2 routing chains. Eleanor's face sharpened. Do we have lawful access? Through the production Vale Nova made to the creditor group last quarter, plus supplemental data their counsel has now preserved. We are not using anything from Nathan's marital records for corporate action. Keep it that way, Eleanor said. Always, Samuel replied. That mattered to me more than either of them knew. Madison had broken the marriage. Preston may have broken his company's trust, but I would not break the line between them just to make the story easier. If the records condemned them, the records would do it without my hands getting dirty. At 2:15, Helixer's decision became real. They did not issue a press release. They did not need to. Their executive team quietly canceled the evening transaction dinner. Then, their chief business officer withdrew from a joint media availability. Then one of their attorneys sent a written hold notice that made every lawyer in the suite go still. Eleanor read it twice before sliding the tablet toward me. They are not just pausing. They are evaluating withdrawal rights and alternative structures. Meaning, the merger as Preston sold it may not survive. Helixer might walk, or they might try to pick up assets later at a lower valuation if Vale Nova weakens. A $500 million celebration had become a distressed negotiation before the coffee stations were cleared. That was not my revenge. That was math meeting disclosure. Around 3, news began moving through the conference app chats and private text chains. No official statement, just fragments. Signing delayed. Diligence issue. Board review. Clinical disclosure questions. Expense problem. By 3:30, Vale Nova's booth looked different. The brochures were still arranged neatly, but the employees behind the table smiled too quickly. People approached, asked careful questions, and left without taking meetings. I saw Preston once across the atrium. He was surrounded by counsel and 2 board members. He looked smaller, not physically, but structurally, like the invisible scaffolding that had held him above other people had been removed. When his eyes found mine, there was no smirk left. Only calculation and anger trapped behind legal advice. Madison stood 20 feet away from him, near a column, watching the same scene. She tried calling him. I saw her lift the phone and lower it when he declined. For a few seconds, she looked almost young, not because she was innocent, but because illusions can age a person backward when they break all at once. Then she saw me. She crossed the atrium fast, ignoring 2 colleagues who tried to stop her. Nathan, she said, breathless. Please, just 5 minutes. Eleanor was not beside me then. She had stepped into the legal suite. I still kept my voice even. No, you do not understand what they are doing to me. Who is they? Her eyes filled, but no tears fell. Legal. Human resources. Preston. Everyone is acting like I am some kind of liability. I held her gaze. Are you? She flinched. I made mistakes. I know that. But this is bigger than us now. It was bigger than us when you used a corporate conference to parade your affair in front of my face. Do not say it like that. How should I say it? She looked around, terrified someone would hear the plain words she had lived so carelessly. I thought he loved me. There it was. The sentence she believed would turn betrayal into tragedy. But love was not a receipt. It did not erase choices. It did not refund humiliation. It did not convert misconduct into misunderstanding. Maybe you did, I said. That is between you and your conscience. And us, she whispered. There is no us without attorneys now. Her face crumpled, but I did not step forward. She had trained me for months not to reach for her. Preston emerged from the legal corridor then, phone at his ear, his expression tight. Madison turned toward him automatically, still expecting rescue from the man who had promised access. He saw her and covered the phone with one hand. Do not come near me right now, he said, low but clear enough for both of us. Madison froze. Preston, I mean it. Counsel has advised no personal contact tied to this matter. Personal contact? She repeated, as if the phrase itself had slapped the dream out of her. He looked past her, toward me, then back to her. You need your own lawyer. Then he walked away. Madison stood in the middle of the atrium with hundreds of conference attendees moving around her, and for the first time, no one important was pretending she belonged to them. The man she chose had reduced her to exposure. The husband she mocked had reduced her to process. And the room she had wanted so badly had learned to look through her. That evening, Eleanor confirmed what the day had been building toward. Vale Nova's board had opened a formal internal investigation. Preston's authority over merger communications was suspended. Helixer had reserved all rights, including withdrawal. If the review found misleading investor communications, improper certification, or material misstatements transmitted across state lines, the matter could move. Beyond civil consequences, federal consequences were not a threat. They were a direction records sometimes took. I looked out at Boston again, the same harbor that had reflected my face the night before. I had not destroyed Preston Vale. His own documents had begun that work long before I arrived. I had only stopped letting him laugh over them. The formal end of my marriage did not happen in Boston. Boston only showed me the truth under brighter lights. The legal end came 11 weeks later in a conference room in Manhattan, behind frosted glass walls, at a long table where nobody touched the water. By then, Vale Nova's celebration had already turned into something people discussed carefully and never on record. Helixer had walked away from the merger as structured. Vale Nova's board had removed Preston from all deal authority, then placed him under internal review while lawyers examined expense approvals, investor materials, and messages tied to the transaction. His name was still on the company website, but the rooms no longer belonged to him. Lawyers spoke for him now. Directors questioned him now. The man who once mocked me under a $500 million banner was waiting for other people to decide how much of his future could be saved. Madison lost her position before summer settled over New York. The company called it a separation during review. Her attorney called it unfair. Eleanor called it predictable. I called it what it was. The cost of believing being close to powerful people was the same thing as being protected by them. For weeks, Madison tried to reach me. First with angry voicemails. Then with crying ones. Then with emails saying Preston had manipulated her. Then with messages saying she never meant to humiliate me. I did not answer directly. Eleanor handled everything through counsel, because legal boundaries had carried me through the worst day of my marriage, and I was not going to abandon them because Madison had discovered regret. In the mediation room, she looked different from the woman who had walked ahead of me into BIO Boston. Her clothes were still expensive, but they no longer looked like armor. Her hands kept moving around a paper coffee cup as if warmth could steady her. She did not look evil. That almost made it harder. She looked human, frightened, and late. Her lawyer sat beside her with explanations about pressure, ambition, stress, and emotional confusion. Eleanor sat beside me with bank records, travel timelines, reimbursement summaries, public photographs, and the settlement papers. Madison finally looked at my left hand. No ring. No mark. Time had finished what decision started. Nathan, she said softly, can we speak without attorneys for 5 minutes? Her lawyer whispered to her, but she ignored him. Please, I just need you to hear me as your wife. I looked at the woman I had once planned a life with. For one moment, grief moved through me quietly. Then I remembered the ballroom. I remembered her laughing. I remembered her telling me not to embarrass her while another man used my silence as entertainment. You are not my wife in this room, I said. You are a party to a divorce. Her face tightened. That is cruel. No, I said. It is accurate. She lowered her eyes. I know I hurt you. But Preston lied to me. He made me believe I mattered. I looked at her for a long moment. Madison, he did not make you laugh. She closed her eyes. That was the sentence she could not negotiate with. Not Preston. Not ambition. Not confusion. The laugh belonged to her. The choice to stand beside him belonged to her. The decision to treat my loyalty like low value belonged to her. I was ashamed, she whispered. Of me. She did not answer fast enough. When she finally said, of how small my life felt. The truth was worse than the lie would have been. I nodded once. Then you should have left honestly. Eleanor slid the settlement forward. The division was fair, firm, and clean. Marital funds used for unexplained travel and personal expenses were credited back. The joint accounts were closed. Support was limited and temporary. There would be no interview from me. No public accusation. No social media performance. I had no interest in turning my divorce into entertainment for strangers. The record had done enough. Madison signed first. Her hand shook slightly. Then I signed. The pen made a small sound against the paper, ordinary and final. When it ended, she stood near the elevator holding her copy of the life she had traded away. "I am sorry," she said. This time, I believed her. It changed nothing. "I hope you become someone who does not need a powerful man beside you to feel visible," I said. The elevator opened. Eleanor stepped in with me. Madison stayed in the hallway. As the doors closed, I saw her reflection split across the polished metal. Months later, people asked if I regretted Boston. They never understood. I did not destroy Preston because he wanted my wife. I enforced rights because his documents could not carry the weight of his arrogance. I did not end my marriage because Madison embarrassed me in public. I ended it because public humiliation revealed a private truth I could no longer excuse. I did not need revenge. I only needed to stop protecting people from the consequences of their own choices. Preston lost the chair he thought made him untouchable. Madison lost the world she betrayed me to enter. And I walked away with the one thing neither of them could borrow, buy, or laugh out of me, my name. Because in America, people like to say the chickens always come home to roost. In Boston, they finally did.